This conference will now be recorded.
All right, well, let's continue. We're going through the book of Exodus, and we've gotten to the really exciting part, all the details of the law of Moses. I'm being a little bit facetious there, but this is where we are, and there's great things to learn there. So just a little background from what we talked about last week. The Lord has just spoken the 10 Commandments to Israelites at Mount Sinai. And then the Lord gives additional laws to Moses that the Israelites are supposed to follow when they go into Canaan. And I think, as all the Christians know, we're no longer bound as Christians to follow all these regulations in the law of Moses. Thank God for that. As I mentioned before, the way Eusebius looked at it, the way he saw the spiritual world is, he said there are kind of like three levels. First level is the kind of relatively lawless way that most pagans live. And they said the first step up from that is the law of Moses. And he says that those of the circumcision, the Jews, have reached the first step, moving upward. He says, but the Christians are those who have ascended the stairway, the whole stairway of the gospel teaching. So this is we're moving in the right direction, but we're not where we're intended to go. Paul uses a very useful similar analogy in Galatians, and he says through the law that the law was given as a guardian or tutor to a child, as the father would give to a child to bring them up to a certain point until the time appointed by the father. So it takes you part the way there, and then it's finished its job. So this is the picture of the law. So there are good things that are in there. Then Colossians 2, Paul says that the law of Moses was nailed to the cross. So we no longer, it's no longer living. We're no longer bound by its requirements. But he says that in the law, there was a shadow of things that were to come, that have been replaced by the substance or reality of Christ. So we see the shadow, and then we see the reality. You know, if you saw a silhouette of Abraham Lincoln when I was a child in school, and President's Day, when they had that, we'd make little silhouettes of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and put them up on the window. Maybe you did that too, I don't know. But if you saw a silhouette of Abraham Lincoln and then Abraham Lincoln walked in the door, you'd say, oh, I know who that is. I've seen his shadow before. So it's the same thing. Is in the law of Moses, we see the shadows that when the reality shows up, aha, you can recognize it. So that's another way of looking at the law of Moses. Why it's important. I mean, after all, Paul said in Romans 15, everything written in the past was written for our learning. So the idea is that all the things in the Old Testament are written for the benefit of the Christian. So there's something in there to dig out. So this is the first step of the stairway. And so we have to dig a little deeper when we're reading this part of the scriptures to take a look at the shadows, so we can see the substance and the realities behind it. Just a little introduction to remind you of why this stuff actually is important and how we should approach it. So let's continue Exodus chapter 21. Now, some of this will be a little dry, and some of this today, depending on how far we get, can be extremely relevant and even controversial. So just let's just hang in there. If you find parts of this to be a little slow, it'll pick up. Exodus 21, let's read verses 28 to 36. We'll pick up right where we left off last time. And this would be a crazy way to start a lesson, but here we are. If a bull gores a man or a woman to death, the bull shall surely be stoned, and its flesh not be eaten. But the owner of the bull will be acquitted. But if the bull tended to gore in times past, and it was made known to its owner, but he did not keep it confined, and it killed a man or woman, the bull shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. But if a sum of money is imposed on him, then he shall pay the amount imposed so as to redeem his life. If a bull gores a son or daughter, it shall be done to him according to this ordinance. If a bull gores a male or female servant, he shall pay their lord 30 shekels of silver, and the bull shall be stoned. If a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. If any man's bull gores his neighbor's bull and it dies, they shall sell the live bull and divide the money, and the dead bull they shall also divide. But if a bull was known to gore in times past, and his owner did not keep it confined, he shall pay bull for bull, and the dead animal shall be his own. So God's attitude, so we learned something about the character of God here. God wants to know who's not just if something bad happens. The attitude is, to what degree are you actually responsible for the bad thing happening? Some people may have an attitude, listen, a gun went off and somebody killed my bull or killed my son, and so I want to go and take that guy's bull or son out. And God says, look, wait a minute. First of all, was it an accident, or is this guy responsible for what took place? It's like if the bull is in the habit of goring people, never did it before. It's like, you know, around here we don't have bulls goring people. We do have dogs. So let's say somebody has a pit bull, all right, and the pit bull. You know, pit bulls have bad reputation. Unfortunately, I don't have any personal experience with pit bulls, so I can't speak to them, but I know they're controversial and they bring up a lot of feelings and emotions. Pit bulls are Doberman pinschers. You have a pit bull and the dog bites a child and harms the child. Well, the first thing you want to know before you kill the animal or you punish the owner is this the first time this animal ever did that, or did the owner know there was a problem there? And if the owner knew that there was a problem there, didn't do anything about it, then there's a much higher element of responsibility for that. So that's God's attitude, is it's not just what the outcome was, but what was the heart behind it? And what was the level of responsibility behind it? Was this by accident, or was it something out of the person's control, or somebody have responsibility for it? Similarly, he says if somebody digs a pit. Now my professional background is civil engineering, and we're always and it's water and wastewater engineering. So actually, here we are in Malden here, and I worked on a project where we were digging trenches down the main road in Malden, putting in a big water main years ago. I mean, big water main going out to supply water to the people of this part of Massachusetts. And so I was there as the engineer to inspect that we had designed the water main. So you have to dig up the street, big trench, and you got to be really careful to mark off the trench and protect everybody. And then at night, you put plates over the trench so nobody falls in by accident, because if they did, they'd go after us as the designers of the thing. So we're responsible for that. It's just the same idea here, is that you have to take responsibility for what you're doing. It's your intent and your level of responsibility God is concerned about. So this all makes sense. So God's establishing a certain level of order, and you'd learn some things about the nature of God. Let's continue here in verse 37. Now, if I'm going to read verse 37 for the first 4 verses of the next chapter. Now, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in at night and is killed, there shall be no guilt for his blood. But if the sun rises on the thief, there shall be guilt for his blood if his blood is shed. However, he should make full restitution, but if he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the thing stolen from a donkey to a sheep is found alive in his hand, he shall restore double. If a man allows his field or vineyard to be grazed upon, but lets loose his animal and feeds on the field of another man, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. So a few things here. It says if someone steals an ox or a sheep, you have to restore 5 to 1 for the ox and 4 to 1 for the sheep. All right. Now, before this, we read eye for eye, tooth for tooth, whatever, bone for bone, everything for everything else. So basically, whatever somebody does to you, you do the same thing back, but you don't take vengeance. But here he says, if someone steals an ox or sheep, they got to pay back 4 or 5 times what they stole. Now, why is that? Why would God require more than what the bad thing the person did? And I think about that. I'll tell you, I'll give you my opinion, which is worth as much as anybody else's opinion, I guess, not a whole lot. But so I'm thinking about, why would God do that? Why would he say, if somebody hurts you, it gouges your eye, you can take their eye out, but you can't do anything more than that. You can't exact vengeance, but he says pay back 4 or 5 to 1 if they steal one of your animals. So my opinion, God is trying to discourage people becoming professional thieves. I mean, think about it. If you're thinking, let's see, I can go out and work for a living, or I can steal for a living instead. So I can let's weigh the options here. Say, well, if I steal something, what's the worst case scenario? Worst thing that can happen is I get caught and I have to give back the thing that I stole. Say, hey, this sounds like a good profession. If I don't get caught, I gain what I stole. If I do get caught, I just give it back. It's just, you just gave back what you took. So God says, no, 4 times, but you're gonna have to pay 4 or 5 times back. You're paid multiple times back. So it's a big barrier for people who are tempted to steal to realize, oh, this is not a good way to make a living. So I think God's wise in putting that in there. And this story also reminds me of Zacchaeus in the New Testament. In Luke 19, Zacchaeus, it says, verses 8 and 9, it says, Zacchaeus said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half my goods to the poor. And if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restored 4-fold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation's come to this house because he also is a son of Abraham. So he was a wealthy man. And he said, if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, if I've cheated anybody, I'm going to give him back 4 times as much. That's a good heart. That's a good-hearted man. He wants to more than make up for the bad things that he did. So, and then that's the Spirit of God here also. Exodus chapter 22. Let's read. Continue reading. Verses 5 to 14. If a fire breaks out and catches in thorns, but sets threshing floors, stack grain, or a field on fire, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. If a man gives his neighbor money or goods to keep, but it is stolen out of the man's house, the thief shall pay double if he's found. But if the thief is not found, then the Lord of the house shall be brought before God, and he shall swear he played no wicked part with regard to any of the neighbor's deposit. For any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or clothing, or any alleged loss of whatever kind, the cause of both parties shall come before God, and he that is convicted by God shall repay double to his neighbor. If anyone gives his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to keep, and it dies, is injured, or is taken, but no one knows it, then an oath of God shall be between them both, that he is not guilty with regard to the deposit, and the owner of the deposit shall accept this. Thus no compensation shall be made to him. But if in fact the deposit is stolen from him, he shall compensate the owner. But if it's torn to pieces by a beast, he shall bring it as evidence and make no compensation. If a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it becomes injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make compensation to the owner. But if its owner was with it, he shall not make compensation. If it was hired, it came for its hire. So this is more the same idea about what are you responsible for, what are you not responsible for, and God's putting some boundaries around this. Say, look, was it your fault? Was it partly your fault? Was it not your fault? Are you telling the truth? Did you steal something? So this is God trying to establish some limitations and boundaries for people treating each other justly, and not just having chaos and theft and vengeance breaking out all over the place. Okay, now it gets a little more interesting here. Verse 15, more interesting to me anyway. So verse 15, If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. But if her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money to her father according to the bride price of virgins. You shall not permit a sorcerer to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. He who sacrifices to any god except the Lord alone, he shall be put to death. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or orphan. If you afflict them in any way and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will be widows and your children orphans. If you lend money to any poor brother among you, you shall not be hard on him or charge him interest. If you take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering. His only garment for covering is nakedness. What will he sleep in? So it will be when he cries out to me, I will hear him, for I am merciful. You shall not speak against gods. Let's just stop right there. Okay, verse 26. So couple things here that I notice. One, God hates sorcery. So we should have nothing whatsoever to do with the occult. This is not something to play around with based on curiosity or anything else. Okay, now the other thing it says, don't lie down with an animal. I don't think he's talking about lying down with a sheep when it's cold in the wintertime just to stay warm. Okay, obviously he's talking about bestiality. He's talking about having sex with animals. Now, I know we have some children here, but this is what it says. So now, why would God have to talk about this to the Israelites? I mean, why would this become an issue with them? Considering their background, the fact that they're following God, they know God, they worship God, and everything else. And I think the reason is he's preparing them for going into the land of Canaan. Okay, and in Genesis 15, God made a promise. Let's just turn back there. Genesis 15. I'll tell you why I think this is important for them. Tell us something about God. Genesis 15, starting reading in verse 12. This is the promise to Abraham that his descendants would inherit the land of Canaan. It says, now around sunset a trance fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. Then he said to Abram, know for certain your seed will be strangers in a land not their own, and will serve them, and they will afflict and humble them 400 years. Also the nation they serve I will judge, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. But as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, buried in a good old age. Then in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the sin of the Amorites is not yet filled up. So God's talking about three groups of people. He says, I'm going to judge the Egyptians. Your descendants are going to serve the Egyptians, but I'll judge them. He says, I'm going to bring your descendants back to this land. So Abraham was in Canaan at the time. He says, your descendants are going to leave here, and then they're going to come back after 400 years. For the sin of the Amorites is not filled up. So God is going to wait until the depravity of the Amorites has reached full measure before he sends his people back in there. How bad was the sin of the Amorites? How bad was the sin of the people living in Canaan? Let's turn to Wisdom of Solomon. Wisdom of Solomon was in the original King James up until the late 1800s, and it's still in the Catholic and Protestant Bibles. So let's just read from there. I think there's an interesting passage that talks about what was going on in Canaan, the land the people were about to go into. Wisdom of Solomon in verse 3. Chapter 12. Sorry, Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 12 and verse 3. It says, for you hated the inhabitants of your holy land long ago, because they practice very hateful works of sorcery and unholy rites. These unmerciful murderers of children who ate sacrificial meals of human flesh and blood. These initiates in the midst of an orgy. These parents and murderers of helpless children, you will to destroy by the hands of our fathers, that the land most precious of all to you might be a worthy colony of the servants of God. But even these you spared, since they were men, and sent wasps as forerunners of your army, that you might destroy them little by little. You were not powerless to give the ungodly to the righteous in regular battle, or to destroy them by terrible wild beasts, or by one severe word. But judging them little by little, you gave them a chance for repentance. For you are not unaware that their generation was evil, their vice implanted, and their reasoning would not change forever. For they were an accursed seed from the beginning, nor did you give them amnesty from their sins because you feared anyone. So an interesting passage is that God, first of all, gives you a sense of how depraved the people of Canaan were. When God says, wipe them out, make no treaties with them, don't intermarry with them, it's because these people were involved in unspeakable, horrendous depravity at the time that they were in it. And and the amazing thing to me is God says, look, I cared about those people too. I sent the hornets in there. So he sent the insects in first. He said, I sent the hornets in there so that hopefully they would wake up and repent, because God doesn't want to destroy even people involved in that wickedness. He wants them to repent. So so that tells me something about God as well. So the wickedness and the depravity, the unspeakable depravity, the Amorites is sunken into the full measure of depravity. And God's concerned when he sends his people in there, are they going to become like the people who are there now? If they don't wipe them out, or the people don't repent, they're going to intermingle with them. They're going to become just like them. You know, the bad, don't be deceived. Bad company corrupts good character. You become like the people you hang around with. So tremendous lesson to that. So God cares about the wicked people, but he's concerned you can become as bad as the people that you're hanging around with. You're spending time with. The other thing here I like is says, don't mistreat aliens and strangers. He says, don't think you're better than them. He says, you were aliens in Egypt. So don't look down on aliens, people who are not from the country that you're from. He says that so God's concerned about this. He's sending them into a new land, and he says, don't look down on strangers. Don't look down on foreigners. Don't look down on aliens. Be kind to them. You were strangers once yourself. In 1 Peter chapter 2, Peter says, talking to the Christians, it says, we are all aliens and strangers here in this world. This isn't our homeland. And but the logic, God's logic is, look, you were aliens, so don't think you're better than anybody else. I'll give you a story from Allison and my own experience here. We were living in, Allison look a little worried right now. This is actually a good story. We were we're working with a church group. We went to Albania, of all places. This was a crazy time in Albania. So the country had just fallen apart fairly recently. I mean, government lost control of the country, not just a few cities or a few blocks. They lost control of the whole country for a period of time, and they lost control of the guns, lost control of everything. So the order had been restored to the country. We went into the country. I, like a typical American, only spoke one language. I'd never been outside the country for anything more than a short vacation. And so here we are, you know, going into Albania in the middle of Tirana, Albania, not speaking a word of Albanian, which is a tough language to learn. And so we were, our friends there got an apartment for us that was not terribly close to their apartment or any other apartments around. So, and they took us there at night, and they said, here's the key, and the apartment's up on the 5th floor. So we went up there. It's dark, okay? And Allison and our 2 small children are with me. We're in the middle of Albania, crazy place, and you know, everything looks kind of scary to us right there. And there are some things that were dangerous. We don't know what's dangerous and what's not. So and Eddie Carlton was with us. He's here in lesson 2. So So we went up to the apartment and took the key and stuck it in the lock and tried to turn it, and it wouldn't open. Okay. And so I tried it a few different ways and it wouldn't open. And so I was scared to death. You know, I don't know anybody here. I don't speak the language. I don't know the customs. I don't know what area is safe and what area is not safe. Well, how did I get here? What do I do now? And so, and there was an old man slowly walking up the steps. And he was known as the Eggman. Okay, now people who are Beatles fans, that may mean something totally different than this, but he was the Eggman. All right, so he was the Eggman, and the Eggman got this title because he would, you know, you didn't have supermarkets back then. I mean, so he would be sitting by a pile of eggs, like a giant pyramid of eggs, and he would be sitting there all day long by his pile of eggs, and you would go up and you'd buy eggs from the Eggman. So everybody knew him as the Egg. So he was the Eggman, and he was walking up. I guess he was all done selling eggs for the day, and he saw that I was obviously not Albanian and didn't know what I was doing. He grabbed the key out of my hand, stuck it, and somehow he knew the right way to jiggle the keys and open the door up. And I thought, thank God that there's somebody who took kindness on an alien, an obvious stranger in the country. So it made a big impression on me that, wow, this guy's looking out for something. He doesn't have to look out for me. But he was just being a kind to a stranger who didn't know what he's doing. So, you know, and here in Malden has, I think we have the most people from more different countries in Malden than in any city in Massachusetts. Wow. So it's a tremendously diverse community. Huge number of immigrants here are immigrants or visitors or students, whatever. And this is the heart of God, is that he wants his people to be looking out for aliens, not just look. He doesn't say just take care of the Jews. He says, no, take care of the aliens also. This tells me something about the heart of God. So this has been a controversial subject in the United States. People are pro-immigration, people are anti-immigration. Let's build the wall. Let's tear all the walls down. Let's let everybody in, whatever. Okay. And you know, thank God I don't have to make any of those decisions. I'm not in the government, will never be in the government, and don't know what the correct solution to that is. What kind of immigration policy is the right one for the United States to have? I really don't know. Okay. He says practice hospitality. It doesn't mean you take the front door off and have the entire world come into your home to have lunch. I mean, from living in Albania, I'll tell you right now, if they said anybody who wants to can come into the United States, okay, and we'll give you free healthcare, free education, and we'll send you a check every month. Guess how many people be left in the country of Albania right now? Nobody. They'd all come here. Okay. Sorry, I probably terribly offend a bunch of people by making that comment. It's an exaggeration, but if you've been to poorer countries, you realize there are tens of millions of refugees and people who are in tough places where they have, you know, no economic opportunity. They're in grinding poverty, and they would love to come to a place like the United States. Could the United States take all those people? You know, I don't know. I don't think so. It would be an awful lot of people. So what do you do? What do you do? This country was built on immigrants. So, but however the government sorts that out, or whatever we think the best policy is regarding how many or how to welcome immigrants to the country, I think the attitude of the Christians should be, hey, we're aliens and strangers in the world, and if we see somebody who is not born here, then our heart goes out to them and we try to help them in any way that we can. And I think, you know, we're here or anywhere else. That's the heart of God. God's telling us that we need to do that. So this is not a political statement. It's more a personal attitude that we need to have. And to me, this is just part of what Jesus said. The second greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself, and that extends to people who are aliens and foreigners, as well as people who are born here. There's no difference. The other thing he talks about is looking out for widows and orphans. He talks about that too. and in the Old Testament. He says, don't mess with widows and orphans, because if they cry out to me, I'm going to smash you down. So it's like God's got it in personally for the widows and the orphans. He has a special place in his heart. He loves everybody, but he has a special place in his heart for widows and orphans, for those who don't have somebody looking out for them. And so he says, you better take care of them. And James says in the New Testament, this is the same exact thing. James 1:27, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and keep oneself unspotted from the world. So basically, it's both things. You have to, you got to be living a pure life and not being contaminated spiritually by the world. That's one side. The other side is you have to be generous and looking out for those who have less than we do and who need protection and who need help and friendship. You have to do both. And most Christian groups will either like one and they won't like the other. It says no, pure and undefiled religions, you have to do both at the same time. So God is concerned about the poor, and he wants us to have that attitude too. And this isn't socialism. This isn't Marxism. This isn't socialism. He's not saying take a gun out and force the rich people to give their money to the poor. He says, no, you do this yourself. You do it voluntarily. You do it it's motivated out of love, not out of envy and class warfare. Okay, this is not forcing people to redistribute their wealth. That's not it at all. When John the Baptist was preparing people, Isaiah said that he came to prepare the way for the Lord. Let's look at what John the Baptist said. In Luke chapter 3. This is kind of God's version of social justice here, so it's a little different than man's version. But it's there. At Luke chapter 3, after he quotes from Isaiah, a voice of the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Verse 7, then he said to the multitudes that came out to be baptized by him, brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Therefore bear fruits worthy of repentance. Do not begin to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. For I say to you, God's able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. And even now the axe is laid at the root of the trees. Therefore every tree which does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So the people asked him, saying, what shall we do then? He answered and said to them, he who has 2 tunics, let him give to him who has none, and he who has food, let him do likewise. So that's Luke chapter 3, verses 7 to 11. Prepare for the coming of the Lord. Watch out for the destruction to come. What shall we do? That's what he says. Take care of those who have less than you do. Be generous. Share. It's basically putting meat and bones onto the teaching. Love your neighbor as yourself. You have 2, the other guy has nothing, you help them out. Paul says if a man will not work, he shouldn't eat. So he's not talking about just if somebody doesn't want to work, if somebody isn't doing anything, if somebody's lazy, you don't subsidize that. But if somebody is poor, they're doing the best they can, you can help them out. You need to do that. That's what he's teaching here. So God's concerned about the poor, and he wants us to do something about it. Jesus talks about this directly in the story of the rich man and Lazarus, Luke 16. The rich man has plenty, and Lazarus is begging at the door, has nothing. And the rich man has to pay for that, for his lack of love in the end, after he dies. Matthew chapter 25, in the story of the sheep and the goats, Jesus says, whatever you did for the least of my brothers, you did for me. And that's the basis on which he separates the sheep from the goats. And he talks about, what did you do for those who were in tougher shape than you were, those who were poorer in some way than you were? Did you feed the hungry, clothe those without clothes, take care of strangers, visit the sick and the shut-ins, visit those in prisons, things like that? It says, what did you do? God's heart for those who are in tough shape. We see it in the Old Testament in this story here in Exodus, but it's given full development in the New Testament. It hasn't changed at all. It hasn't diminished at all. Let's continue in Exodus chapter 22. Verse 27. I'm reading from the Septuagint version here. It says, "You shall not speak against gods, nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer the first of your threshing floor and fruit press. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise you shall do with your calf, sheep, and donkey. It shall be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. Now you shall be holy men to me, and you shall not eat meat torn by wild animals in the field. You shall throw it to the dog." Okay. Now, in the Septuagint, there's a line here that threw me initially. And so I went back and said, does this really mean this? Let's look at a few different translations. It says, "You shall not speak against gods." So wait a minute, there's only one God. We're not supposed to follow any of the gods. Why would he say that? "You shall not speak against gods, nor shall you curse a ruler of your people." In the Masoretic text, it says, most Bibles say, "You shall not revile God," singular. Here, there he says God's plural. I'm saying, what's this all about? Well, it's in context, it reminds me of what it says in Psalm 82, which Jesus quotes in John chapter 10. He says, "Isn't it written in your law, I have said you are gods," referring to people with the expression gods. So that's a deep subject we're not going to explore, other than to say that the term gods is used by God in some sense as referred to people. We're not divine, we're created beings, so it's not taking anything away from that. But perhaps this is in a similar sense, that people are being referred to gods in the sense that they are rulers like God is, or that they are judges like God is. So it says, don't speak against the ruler of your people. So does anybody know where this quote comes up in the Bible? In the New Testament, don't speak evil against the rule of your people. Now, this is an unfair question for Adam, so I'm not going to put him on the spot. But in Acts 23, Paul is brought before the council. He's in Jerusalem. He's in trouble. He's brought before the council and the high priest in Jerusalem. And let's read that. It's a good story. But because it quotes this passage right here, to give you a little appreciation for it. Acts 23. Acts 23. Let's start in Acts 22, verse 30. "The next day, because he wanted to know for certain why he was accused by the Jews, he released him from his bonds and commanded the chief priests and all the council to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, 'Men and brethren, I've lived in all good conscience before God until this day.' And the high priest Ananias commanded that those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, 'God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. For you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law?' And those who stood by said, 'Do you revile God's high priest?' Then Paul said, 'I didn't know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of the ruler of your people.'" So he's quoting this passage in Exodus as, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I have to treat the high priest. Even the high priest is saying, smack him in the mouth. And he says, and he lays out the high priest and said, "Oh, sorry, he's the high priest. I shouldn't have said that." what he did was wrong and is violating the law, but I should have been respectful to the fact that he was a high priest, because it says right in the law, and I need to follow what it says, that you will not speak evil of your rulers. And of course, Peter says the same thing in 1 Peter chapter 2. He says, submit yourselves to every ordinance from man for Lord's sake, whether the king is supreme or governors as those who are sent by him. And then he says, he sums it up in 1 Peter 2:17. He says, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. So we're supposed to treat the king with honor. This goes, the first step here was to say, don't speak evil of the rule of your people. And then in the New Testament, we're extending the stairway, and it says, honor the king and submit to every ordinance, whether the king is supreme or governors, those who are sent by him. Now, we don't have a king, we have president, we do have governors, we have mayors, we have policemen who are enforcing laws, things like that. So the basic principle is Christians are called to honor those who are in authority in the government, even when they're doing bad things. Paul got a hand slapped in his mouth for saying nothing wrong at all. And he said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak evil against the ruler of my people, because that's what God says. So Paul, out of his submission and respect for God, was willing to endure bad treatment without lashing out in return. So this holds to us as Christians, whether we're dealing with the President of the United States, currently Donald J. Trump, okay, or the Congress, the Speaker of the House, Supreme Court, Governor of Massachusetts, okay, Charlie Baker, there you go. So, or whatever, or the mayor of the town that we're in, is that whether I'm sure if you mention the word Donald Trump, that definitely provokes a strong reaction, positive or negative, in the hearts of probably everyone who's hearing this, because it's very hard to stay neutral about Donald Trump, or maybe both. I mean, it's like, I really like this about him, but I really can't stand this about him. So, but he's a very, very controversial character, regardless, okay? Or if Hillary won the election, regardless of where you personally stand, this principle here stands. Don't speak evil of the ruler of your people and submit to the governing authority. So, okay, we can't join in with the rest of the world in abusing political figures on either side. We can't do that as Christians. That is out of bounds, okay? It's not because the leaders are agreeing with me. It's totally independent of that. Now, John the Baptist, because when I throw something out, I'll think, well, is there another side of the story here? Am I missing something? John the Baptist got his head taken off for addressing the sin of Herod. Now, he simply said, it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. He's stating a fact. He's stating a fact that's just the truth. Legally, under the law of Moses, you can't do that. That's unlawful. And he addressed the fact. He's calling somebody to repent of a sin. He's just stating a fact, but he's not being disrespectful to the king. He's not trying to start a revolution, overthrow the king, or anything else. He's just speaking the truth. So there is room for us to speak the truth, but not to be defaming those who are in authority. It seems to me. I don't see any way around that for Christians. If we want to follow what the Bible says, we can respectfully call out sin, but we need to be submissive and respectful to the government, disobeying the governing authorities when they contradict direction from the ultimate governor, from God, from Jesus, from the king over the kingdom. Okay, let's continue. Exodus 23. Okay. Okay, now we jump from the frying pan into the fire here on this one. So, still got a few minutes. Verses 1 to 9. Now you shall not circulate a false report. Do not agree with the wicked man to be an unrighteous witness. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor join with them so as to turn aside with the majority to pervert justice. You shall not show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him. If you see your enemy's donkey fallen beneath its load, you shall not walk away from it, but shall surely help him with it. You shall not pervert the judgment of your poor in his dispute. Keep yourself far from every unjust matter. Do not kill the innocent and the righteous. Do not justify the wicked for his gifts. You shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes and corrupts pronouncements. And you shall not oppress a resident alien, for you know the heart of the resident alien, because you were resident aliens in the land of Egypt. So there's a lot in here. One thing I noticed is don't circulate a false report. So what's the big saying? Fake news, all right? The people on the right are saying the people on the left, that's CNN, MSNBC, that's fake news. No, Fox News, no, that's fake news. So everybody thinks that half of the news that's going out in the country is fake news. So, and God doesn't like fake news either. He doesn't like that. He says, do not circulate a false report. And, Christians can do this more than we think, particularly with social media, because you can take some information that you found on social media and just like it, hit it, spread it around without doing the homework to find out, is this actually true? Is this factually true, or am I just spreading a rumor here? So, and how do you know what's true and what's not? I mean, you listen, depending on which media you listen to, you get two totally different versions of reality. So it's very hard. It's very hard even to communicate with people who are listening to different outlets than you are. I think the best way with anything is to try to be objective as possible and try to fact check anything before you spread it around. And that takes more time to do it, to say, okay, I want the facts, I want the data, I want the primary source information. I'm not going to assume anything. I'm not going to just believe what's being pumped out there. Because to do otherwise really is to engage in, the Bible words are gossip and slander and circulating a false report. Now, Paul gives warnings against gossip in 1 Timothy 5. He talks about people who, in this case, he's talking about women have too much time on their hands. They're not busy doing good things specifically, but same principle applies to men. He says they're just wandering around spreading tales and gossiping. He says this is a bad thing. Christians shouldn't be living their lives that way. He says don't follow a crowd to do evil. I thought, wow, in so many churches today, right now, we're just going through Exodus. We're just, we're doing the opposite of what everybody else is doing. We're just going through Exodus, going through the law of Moses. And probably most churches today, there's all the Black Lives Matter, there's Antifa, there's the reparations, there's all the rioting in Boston. What do we do about this? How do we respond to this? How do we show sympathy and support? All this stuff. I'm just going through the book of Exodus, and it says, don't follow a crowd to do evil. Like, you can't do this. You just can't. There's no justification for this. And this happens in so many different ways. I mean, it's not just getting caught up with a crowd that's smashing windows and firebombing and looting, but also it can be in churches. The same thing can happen in a different way of just following the crowd, going along with what everybody else is doing. That's dangerous. A lot of people's idea about how to live the Christian life is find the right group, number one, and number two, just stay in the middle lane of the road. Okay, and you can't do that. You can't do that. Because who knows where they're going or what they're doing. You have to stand for the truth, and you have to be willing to take a stand, even if you're one of a few or if you're alone, if you're by yourself. God's attitude is don't follow a crowd to do evil. Don't go with the minority. People feel comfortable if they're say, well, can't be that bad because everybody else is doing it. Well, that's the broad road that leads to destruction. So we have to be committed to following the word of God and following the truth, and being willing to take a stand against anybody that we're around, whether they're in the church or out of the church. Basic fundamental principle. The other thing here I noticed is it says if your enemy's donkey falls down or is having a hard time. Now, it doesn't say if your enemy's having a hard time to help your enemy, but if his animal, your enemy's a bad guy, but don't take it out on his animal here. Don't take it out on his ox or his donkey. So the donkey falls down, you help the donkey up again, and then you shun your neighbor and go on with your life. So I'm reminded of what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9 when he's talking about don't muzzle the ox while it's treading out the grain. And then he comes back and he says, is it oxen God's concerned about here? It's the same thing here. It says the enemy's oxen falls down, or donkey falls down, you help. Is it oxen and donkey God's really concerned about? No. And in the New Testament, we go up the rest of the stairway when it says you love your enemy, not just the enemy's donkey. You actually, it goes all the way to even an enemy, the guy who's driving the donkey. So the roots of loving your enemies and being kind to your enemies are even in the law of Moses, and it says, don't persecute the innocent along with the righteous. Okay. When the U.S. government, they don't want to send pilots in because they get shot down. So what they'll do is they'll send in a drone that take out the bad guy, and the bad guy will be attending a wedding or a party or a funeral or something, and they'll send the drone in. Somebody's operating it, remote control like a video game, and it sends the bomb in, blows up. The bad guy gets killed, and 20 other people die. They say, well, that was just collateral damage. That's the way the government refers to this, collateral. We got the bad guy we're after. Unfortunately, there's all these other innocent people that happen to die too as a result of what we did. God says, no, I'm not interested in that. I don't want that. No collateral damage here. Don't persecute the innocent along with the righteous. If somebody's bad, don't paint it with the broad brush and go after everybody. And this is a problem here, I think, in what's going on in society right now. God's concerned with each individual, not as classes or large groups of people. It says in Ezekiel 18, if you're righteous and your father, it's reversed. Basically, if you have a righteous father and a wicked son and a righteous grandson, so God's going to go after the son. He's going to let the father and the grandson alone. He's taking out the son. All right. That's God's attitude. He's going to go after the individuals who are guilty. The whole family's not guilty for the sin. So God's going to judge us individually, not on the basis of a class. I mean, one of the things that I'm noticing in the news is everybody's being treated as a part of a class. Okay, what class are you? You're in. Oh, I'm in the worst possible class. I'm the white male Christian, whatever. It's middle class American. That's like the worst class. I have no respect. I have no right to talk about anything because I'm the ultimate oppressor class. So because I'm treated as you're part of this class, you're not an individual. So what you say is of less concern. God, the Bible says God doesn't look at the outward appearance. Lord looks at the heart. He doesn't care. He really does. People will judge you superficially on the basis of your skin color, on the basis of your wealth or where you live. God doesn't care. He says, Lord looks at the heart. David was an impressive guy on the outside. Man looks at the outward appearance, always been the case, still is today. Lord looks at the heart. So he looks at the individual, and he doesn't want to punish the guilty with the individual. Okay. This is great news flash. Every white person in the United States is not a racist. Okay. I know lots of them who are not racists. And I know plenty of racists too. And I had some racists going back generations in my family. No slaveholders, but I'd hear things that people would say. It's just the way they were brought up. Nobody taught them any better than that. But I've known not all white people are racist. Not all black people are racist either. The whole idea that everybody in the country is a racist based on the class is total nonsense. It's just not true. Racism is a sin. It's discrimination. It's treating one person different than somebody else just based on an outward appearance. And not everybody does that. Some people do. I'm not saying there's no racism, but it's not, everybody's not guilty of that particular sin. Not every white person is a racist. Not every black person is a racist. Not every policeman is a brutal thug. All right. I know policemen who are really nice people, but it doesn't say the opposite either. There are policemen who are abusive, who are racist or sadistic, whatever. You know, it draws all kinds of people into that category. So you got to be careful about lumping together the innocent with the guilty. And lumping together, God says, don't persecute the innocent and the righteous with the wicked. This is a principle. Take out the bad guys, not everybody. Okay. And then another one, and this struck me as really unusual. He says, don't show favoritism toward the poor, nor take bribes. I'm thinking, wait, I can see if it says don't show favoritism towards the rich. Why does it say don't show favoritism toward the poor? Why would anybody show favoritism towards the poor person in a dispute? It's something in a dispute. So the picture here is you get a rich person and a poor person, and they have a dispute with each other. And, you know, people say, well, if I help the rich guy out, maybe he'll help me back. Okay, maybe he can do something for me. But he says, don't take the side of the poor person either. It says, why would somebody do that? Well, I don't know. I don't know. I got a couple of possibilities why somebody would take the side of a poor person. Maybe the judge, the person doing the judging, maybe they resent the rich. Okay. It could either be because they covet what the rich person has that they don't, or it could be that they have been badly treated by rich people or some rich person in the past, and they're glomming that on to the rich person dispute. Or it could also be that somebody'd say there are a lot more poor people than rich people. That's always been the case, okay? So somebody could say, well, there's a poor guy and a rich guy. I'm a poor guy, okay? I relate more to poor people than I do to rich people. So I'm going to naturally side with the guy who's more like me, okay? So, you know, the idea is that the poor will discriminate with the poor, or people will discriminate towards somebody who's more like them. He says, no, you don't do that. You don't discriminate on the basis on the don't show favoritism to the poor, nor take bribes. So whatever the reason for doing that is, God's desire is, if there's a conflict between a rich person and a poor person, who's telling the truth? What's justice? Not who is the member of the oppressed class, but who's telling the truth, who's justice, who's right, who's wrong. That should be the only basis. You know, the statue of justice that they have, it's holding the scales, and what's over the eyes of the justice? It's supposed to be a blinder, you know, no peeking through the eye there. Justice is supposed to be blind. It's supposed to be blind to color. It's supposed to be blind to class. It's supposed to be blind to everything. That's the way justice is supposed to be, because that's God's attitude. He says, don't show favoritism on the basis of something like that. Now, all right, this is all, unfortunately, terribly relevant to what's going on in the world today. And it's not that I'm trying to steer the sermon in this direction, but I'm thinking, okay, and any of these, figuring what's he talking about, and what's the application for us today? What's the application? Okay, the big debate in society right now, and may be going on for a long time, or may disappear like a virus. I don't know. So the big debate is Black Lives Matter. Right? That's the hot issue. And anybody who doesn't agree with, you know, the Black Lives Matter, it was as everybody knows here, horrible injustice was done. White policeman in Minneapolis was basically killed a black suspect criminal in the commission of a relatively minor crime in Minneapolis earlier this year. And everybody I have talked to on any side agrees this was horrible, this is wrong, there's no justification for it, and the policeman must be brought to justice. Everybody agrees on that, okay? But that's not, but the story goes way beyond that. The question goes on, okay, are all whites racist? Is this a racist society? Are most of the problems in the Black community related to racism? Are the police unfairly racist. These are a bunch of questions that are raised, and people will have different opinions about that, which is fine. The problem is anybody who doesn't go along with one side is demonized basically as you're a racist. If you're white and you disagree, you're racist. If and you have no authority to speak. If you're black, you disagree, you're an Uncle Tom. So basically, it's hard to have an intelligent discussion about other aspects of this beyond what everybody agrees with. And part of the problem is that, okay, I'm listening to some of the things that Black Lives Matter as a group is putting out, and most of what I'm picking up is from my son's friends. A lot of young black men are really afraid. They're genuinely afraid. They're afraid of violence being done to them. They are worried. They're scared. Genuine fear. Okay. So that I know for sure. And a lot of the people are being swept up into Black Lives Matter because out of sympathy for the injustice that was done and other injustices that have been done. Okay, as I'm listening to the things that are putting out by the leader of Black Lives Matter, I thought, wow, I'm of 40 years. When I was in college, this is really dating myself here, early 70s, in college, hotbed of all kinds of political activity out there. And so I was in my 20s, early 20s, and I was anti-war back then. Okay, I don't think I was a total pacifist at that time, but I was really anti-war. I was against the Vietnam War. I wouldn't go regardless. I mean, they put me in jail or like something. I wasn't going to go. I was totally against the war. And they would have demonstrations on the campus, and so I was very sympathetic to the anti-war movement. Moved into a kind of a vegetarian communal type alternative living structure with about like 50 people. We lived semi-communally. We'd all eat together. We'd all bake bread together. So I was interested in tight community even back then years ago. So, but one of the things I learned, I was not a socialist. I was not a Marxist at all. I was studying engineering. Most of the people I was hanging around with were studying a lot of things, not as far away as you get from engineering as possible. So I was hanging around with these people, and I realized they're anti-war, but they're also a lot more than anti-war. They're also Marxists. So I was like, they're studying Marxism. They're pushing Marxism. And so I said, I'm anti-war like they are, and I like to eat the same vegetarian food that they do, but I'm not a socialist. I'm totally not. I think that's a horrible thing. So what would happen is a lot of my friends would be organizing the political anti-war demonstrations. Most of the people who came out to the anti-war demonstrations were just against the Vietnam War, and that's about as far as it went. But a lot of the organizers, they saw, the Vietnam War is an opportunity for us to advance a Marxist agenda. And so people would say, all the anti-war people are Marxists, which was totally not true. Most of them were not at all. But the people who are leading the group were, and what they would do at the rallies, they'd say, okay, now we're all here. They say a bunch of stuff. Everybody would agree with anti-war. And they say, by the way, while we're on the subject of oppression, let's also talk about A, B, C, D, E, things that had nothing to do with the war, but were all part of an agenda that they're trying to push, which is capitalism is the problem here because that's the source of all the wars, and there's oppression of women and things like that. So there's a whole agenda. Now, I live with these people, so I argued with them too, but I live with these people. I knew what they thought. I knew what they read. I argued with them. And I said, well, I agree with you on this. Okay, I'm anti-war, but I'm not buying into the whole Marxist thing. So I'm listening to Black Lives Matter saying, wait a minute, boy, does this sound a lot like the stuff I used to hear. So I went on to the Black Lives Matter site. I thought, I'm not just going to listen to I'm not going to ask Fox News what these guys are. So I went on the site and read it and said, what are they pushing? And I thought, wow, this is quite eye-opening. There's way more to it than concern for the situation of the blacks. He said, it's Marxism basically. I'm not saying this is a smear. I'm just saying that's the philosophy that's behind it, and it's pushing LGBTQ ideology. It's anti fatherhood and anti-male leadership of the family. It's anti-nuclear family right on their agenda. They're massively pro-abortion. So there's a whole agenda that the group Black Lives, that the leadership of Black Lives Matter supporting, don't believe anything I tell you, okay? Go back and research this. Take a look at the 3 founders of the group that are involved with the group now. Find out, what do they believe? What are they pushing? Read on their agenda. So this is a Marxist organization. And, I don't know where this is all going. Well, I look, when I check the news, I'm trying to think, okay, is what's going on in Seattle? Am I reading Les Mis right now? Am I reading, is this like barricading off part of the city and pushing everybody out, the red and black flags? What's going on here? Where is this all headed? I don't know. I think I know where some people want it to go. In the Vietnam War, although there were some of the people who were trying to steer the ship into the direction of Marxism, they totally failed. There was a broad-based anti-war movement, and I think good came out of it, which was the end of the Vietnam War. And my hope is that good comes out of this is an awareness of the problems with racism, but Marxism, destruction of capitalism, massive abortion, and destruction of gender roles is not that. I mean, that's the agenda of Satan right there. I mean, and the Bible says in Ephesians 6, our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against the rulers in the spiritual realm, in the dark places. This is against the dominion of darkness. So there's a dark agenda that's being pushed in the country right now. I think I'm very sympathetic to a lot of the concerns of people with civil rights and the fear that people are feeling, and the problems we need to deal with here. But Jesus says that be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. He says, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. Okay, this is a wolf-infested territory that we are in. All right, this is not the Martin Luther King civil rights movement of the 1960s. This is a different animal altogether. So I would encourage you, be wise, be discerning, do the homework. Don't believe anything I tell you. Go back and read, go back and find out what different people are into and what agendas they're pushing. And we need to be not only innocent, but wise to what's around us. And don't buy into this treating people on the basis of classes. If it's this dispute between a rich guy and a poor guy, or a black guy and a white guy, who's telling the truth? Who's right? Who's wrong? That's the issue. And don't ever persecute the innocent with the guilty. The guilty need to be punished, but not everybody. We'll stop for right there for today. Amen. That was a long lesson.